Hi, everyone. I am Sam Osterhout, and I am joined by the amazing Andra Watkins, and this is Unholy Ground. Andra, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm good today. How are you, Sam?
I'm good. I think you're going to be less good after we watch the video clips we're going to watch in this episode. Look, I blame you for aiming my eyeballs at these videos. But that's neither here nor there. I was taken by your pieces this week. Again, everyone, as you all know, in our audience, we tape on Thursdays. So by the time you see this on Sundays, all hell's probably broken loose and all of this stuff. But if you haven't read Andra's work from this week, go back and read it. It is as always, you translate everything for us so beautifully. And I think this week your writing was so on that point about looking at what is happening, what they're saying, and how the two don't always align. And we're going to talk a lot about Joel Webbon today, which is it's a trigger warning for all of you, including Andra, because a couple of weeks ago on his podcast, he made this claim that seizing churches and imprisoning ministers for blasphemy, for not, honoring the one true Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, is righteous in the sight of God, right? So he advocated for marching through Austin, Texas, looking for pride flags on churches, seizing the churches, and imprisoning the pastors.
And it's important to note that, seizing the churches and giving them to, the right kinds of Christians, like him.
Yes. Right. Well, and I want to get to that point in a minute, but he also said something that only Andra Watkins will catch. All of that sounds terrible, but maybe the bigger point is that he said political candidates and Christian nationalist political candidates should not say the thing that he just said, right? And that's what this show today is about, is that word yet, right? Because he said, don't say it yet. Americans aren't ready. So for this kind of first question for you, Andra, before we play the clips, before we see the awfulness, what are they telling us about how much they think they can win in the open when they say things like hide your power?
As a victim of indoctrination, of white Christian nationalist indoctrination, I've had to study how that happened to me. So, and I'm going to say this, and a lot of people listening will probably go, well, I'm not a victim like that. That doesn't happen to me.
Sure.
So I want people here to understand how much of this you are also a victim of without realizing it. One of the key tactics that men like Joel Webbon, white Christian nationalists, Republicans use is an indoctrination tactic that they used in my white Christian nationalist church. You say the outrageous thing. You name it, you say it, you go all the way there and hit people with that, and it traumatizes them. There's a section in your brain called the amygdala that kind of thing is designed to hit and destabilize you and make you have an emotional, outraged reaction to the thing they just said. And then they turn around and say, but, that probably can't happen. We probably can't do that right away. It's probably not possible yet. And what they're doing to your traumatized brain is telling you it's okay to have the normal reaction that millions of Americans have. Oh, they won't ever do that. That won't happen. They can't get away with it. They don't mean that. And so then they come back afterward and say the crazy thing again. And they've forced a lot of our brains to put that lens and that filter of, oh, that won't ever happen. They won't ever do that. He's saying they can't really do that yet. And so I don't need to worry about that right now. Or I don't need to take this seriously. So Millions and millions of us are victims of that kind of indoctrination every day, all the time. And if you've never had to get yourself out of that, you probably don't even realize it's happening to you. So I highlight that right at the top to say we all have to be on guard and aware of this when we talk about people like Joel Webbon and other people in his Theobro community and in the greater Republican and white Christian nationalist world. This is a great slide that Sam made.
Thank you.
To show the progression of how they do that. And we're all victims of it every day, all the time now. So it's really important for your brain, especially, to understand what they're doing and try to call it out and protect yourself from that when you see that happening.
Is there it feels a little bit like, first of all, well, let me play this clip first, and then we can kind of talk more about it. But it's on this episode of Right Response Ministries, their podcast, which is really well produced. Right, it's shiny, a lot of cameras, multicam. It seems very well funded.
It makes me want to vomit, but
it is terrible. It is like, if I've ever found myself in that room, I would be like, God, it's like a terror show. But his co-host, Webbon's co-host, Wesley Todd, said that the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas National Guard should go through downtown Austin, find churches flying pride flags, like I mentioned. He said defrock their ministers, take the property, and auction it off to faithful churches. So let's just run this real quick.
Today's topic absolutely is stemming from that passage that we read about Josiah in 2 Kings chapter 23. Not only was that permissible, it was righteous in the sight of God. So in principle, in theory, the state going into the city of Austin and deposing, seizing the church buildings, property of every pride flag flying church, and saying, I'm sorry, you're losing your property. Maybe they can't actually defrock the ministers, but they can depose
they can be in prison, so they can't preach.
That's true. They can imprison them. That would be wonderful. So you're going to prison for what? For peddling blasphemies against the Lord Jesus Christ publicly.
Yep.
So you're going to prison, or you're paying some crazy fine that effectively, renders you, impotent in your role as a minister, because you're not a minister. You're
Okay. So that's the main action, and he goes on. And it's just as horrible as it all sounds. But then he says this bit.
Right? We say, hey, the founders, we got to get back to our roots. We got to get back to our American heritage. You want to get back to your American heritage? Amen. That's wonderful. Start punishing blasphemers, and also reinstall Sabbath laws. That's American. That's not just biblical. It's American. Here's the deal. In principle, not only is it permissible, it's righteous. It's ideal. It's virtuous. But here's the deal. In terms of application, although it's good, it's not achievable. And it will actually sideline you. That kind of purity spiraling will render you, it'll put you on the bench. It'll sideline you. It'll function as a liability. So you don't run on that. And you don't talk about that as a politician yet. But that is the goal.
Can you care to walk us through that?
So what he's essentially doing is your placard that you just put up, your graphic that you put up a minute ago. He's going through this and explaining to people how to do this to other people. He's preparing the way for this kind of thing. He and other of his Theobro cohorts. You say the thing, then you neuter it. Oh, well, it can't happen yet. So people discount that you're really serious about it. Then you repeat that, actually, I am serious about it. But, we need to hide it for a while. Because if too many of us are saying this at the same time, the American people might catch on that we're really serious about this. You know, we need the American people to stay in that neuter it place where they're not taking this seriously. And so I'll fall on the sword, me and my Theobro cohorts and a few other white Christian nationalists across the manosphere, we'll fall on our swords and we'll say the crazy things and then we'll neuter them for everybody and then repeat them. But the rest of you, you know, we're helping you be able to do this later. So you hide it in the meantime. You don't own up to believing this sort of thing. It's all a very coordinated, you know, set of strategies that they're using across right Christian nationalism right now to manage their messaging, to identify who's going to deliver these messages and who's not going to deliver them, and to make sure that at all times the American populace is so traumatized that they can't process, and so they're given permission in this delivery system to go, they'll never do that.
Yeah.
These are just arrogant, silly extremists, and this won't ever happen. So I'm going to put that over here because we have all these other things that we need to worry about. So it's a very sophisticated delivery system that they're using. It is psychological manipulation.
Well, I was going to say, you know, the thing is, we scream about this every week, and you always say that people think you're just a crazy lady screaming from the hilltops that the sky is falling. I'm also now a crazy lady screaming from the hilltops. You've converted me, but the thing is, they're also saying it. The people who are doing it are also saying the things that we're saying. We're just bringing it to you, our audience, who it doesn't. You guys don't watch this crap, I hope. We watch it so that you don't have to. But I wonder, you know, like you said, it's a very sophisticated coaching method for candidates. So what does a candidate who takes this advice, what do they sound like on a, you know, a school board stage or a state house ballot? What kind of stuff are we listening for?
This is a tactic of dominionism, which now encompasses all of white Christian nationalism. It came out of the New Apostolic Reformation, the NAR, but it's a tactic they're all using now. So it depends on what that particular candidate defines as their sphere of influence. If getting on the school board is their final goal, you know, that's the most they think they can accomplish, that's the furthest they think they can advance, then they would hide this in running for the school board. And if you ask them about it directly, if you ask them about their Christianity or their faith directly, they're going to deflect. They're going to answer with something very benign. So it requires people in communities to be more diligent. And it's easiest to do this at the local level, because in especially smaller and even medium-sized areas, you can find out where a person goes to church if they go. You can talk to people in your community and find out if they're really involved at a church. You could actually even go to their church a couple of times to see what's happening there and decide for yourself how extremist you think it is. You can look at that church's website. You can look at some messages and sermons that the pastor or priest or rector or whatever there has put together, because most churches put that stuff online now. Churches can't hide that. Right. So if any of these candidates are affiliated with a church and go to a church, even if they look, you know, very benign and don't look like they're really into it, that would be a red flag for me, that this person is hiding it.
Right.
And they could then get on the school board and all of a sudden become this person who's like, we're banning all books and we're banning reading and we're banning LGBTQ and trans people and we're banning all activities associated with that in our schools. And I will not budge on that because it's what the Bible says. You know, they could transform into that if that is their end goal. For some people, That's not their end goal. So it's a stepping stone for them to get to whatever level of government they want to get to have the influence they have. And that's what they're taught to do. You hide how extreme you are until you get to the point you want to get to. This is what Sam Alito did.
Yeah.
This is what, so you have to, we have to be smarter about how we vet these people. If we can find out that they've supported extremist causes financially by giving money, do that. If we can find out where they go to church, if their kids go to a school, or they sent their children to a school that's affiliated with something like this, or they homeschooled their children, that's another really big red flag, unfortunately. Yeah. So, there are ways and things that you can look for that are warning signs that a person might be that.
And I think that's a good transition into kind of our, what I want to get into next. But if you're just joining us, this is Unholy Ground. And today we are talking about how white Christian nationalists say the extreme thing out loud, coach their candidates to hide it, and build government machinery to enforce it in the meantime. And I want to look at what, we understand the strategy now, say the extreme thing, hide it, mitigate, say, well, it's probably not going to happen now. And you're slowly pushing people into acceptance. You're also coaching the candidate. So last September, the White House issued National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, NSPM 7, a hot topic on Unholy Ground. And it directs the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces to investigate and disrupt people and groups before any violent act occurs. So we talk about it all the time because it lists a bunch of indicators of terroristic conduct, and those indicators include. I made another nice little graphic.
You made another pretty graphic.
A really pretty one, yeah. And it's almost too pretty for the subject matter. Yeah. Anti-Christianity, anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism. Hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. So connect all of this for us, Andra. How does this, how do their definitions of blasphemy map onto this indicator list?
To understand this indicator list, we have to go all the way back to 2001. And everybody probably remembers what they were doing on September 11th, 2001. I was sitting at my desk. I was running a law firm. And
you were?
Paralegal. Yeah, that's what I used to do. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I was running a law firm. I was an administrator for a law firm. And so a paralegal popped her head in the door and said, a plane just hit one of the World Trade Towers. And I kind of shrugged, I thought, well, New York City's one of the biggest cities on earth. There are all these tall buildings. There are all these planes flying in and out of there. That was bound to happen sooner or later. I thought it was an accident. It was only when the second plane hit that we all started to realize that, oh no, this is something else. This is something really terrible. This was a terrorist act. And then the day unfolded, and everybody probably remembers what they were doing that day. So in the wake of that, our federal government passed the USA Patriot Act of 2001, which greatly eroded our freedoms and liberties as Americans. Because, we were grieving, we were keening, we were terrorized, this impacted every American profoundly. And so they pushed this through to define domestic terrorists and give themselves the tools to surveil and impede those kinds of groups. But the definition of domestic terror in that document is really broad and problematic. So in Section B of that three-part definition of domestic terror, they define domestic terror as intimidation of or coercion of a civilian population, intimidation or coercion of the federal government by a group of people, and then, kidnapping, assassinations, murder, mayhem, those kinds of acts that were representative of 9/11.
Sure.
In the minds of Americans. And, this was 2001. I could still remember seeing an embassy being overrun and Americans being blindfolded and held hostage for a long time. I could still remember images, and we saw images of people driving bombed cars into buildings and blowing things up, so these images were available. So it was really easy to ignore parts 1 and 2 of that definition, just intimidation and coercion of civilians. I mean, what is that really? We don't know. And move on to well, of course they mean all this terrible stuff that we see happening and that we saw happen on 9/11.
Sure.
That definition, that ambiguity, was what they used to define NSPM 7. And so now let's go back to Joel Webbon saying we need blasphemy laws. To a white Christian nationalist, and you and I have said this again and again and again on this show, disagreement is violence to them. They do not countenance people disagreeing with them. They see the advancement of women's rights, the advancement of LGBTQIA plus and trans people, marriage equality, female equality, bodily autonomy, even environmental laws, as intimidation and coercion of them. And since they're the only people who matter to them, because they believe the Bible gives them the right to say that, they have redefined domestic terror using the words from the Patriot Act as intimidation and coercion of them. So that's where this list came from. These are the things that they disagree with and believe are violence against them, violence against their religious liberty. Let's pull out that word that phrase that we've said here a bunch of times. They believe that this is violence against them. Joel Webbon believes a pride flag is violence against him. And so he has every right to see that as intimidation and coercion of him and people who agree with him. And so therefore, we need to have a redefinition of what domestic terror is. And that's where this came from. And I know it sounds crazy, but that is, we had to go all the way back to 2001 to find this is where they pull this language from. This is how they massaged it. And this is how they packaged it into NSPM 7.
Yeah, I always say, I feel like the terrorists won on 2001 because they triggered a massive backlash of, a nation that had the capability to monitor everyone. And we began to build these tools that could keep track of all of us individually, and those tools in the wrong hands, really in every hand is the wrong hand for those tools. But these hands are particularly the wrong hands. And I think, our audience, all y'all out there who watch Unholy Ground every week, I apologize that we present this information to you, but I also am glad you watch because I think this stuff is so important. But most Americans don't believe that this stuff is going to happen because, right, we have a First Amendment, we have a Constitution. But at the top of the show, we outlined how they are messaging and strategizing to make this thing happen. And by April of this year, the FBI stood up the NSPM 7 Joint Mission Center, which is this is that next step. You just start doing these things, and it's a center that's staffed from, I think, 10 agencies. Attorney General Bondi back in those days ordered a list of groups to be compiled for domestic terrorism designation, using those same indicators and all of that same language. The FBI was training state and local police on the directive. Like, this stuff is happening. So, and from this, we also get, the AG designating these things as terrorism. So this continues to move that needle forward. And you see number 4, number 7, civil disorder and trespass. That
right, but on that list, number 6 is the most problematic for me in terms of what we're talking about.
Yes, talk about
because
that.
What is a threat of violence? Based on what we've talked about today and how we've tracked this from the USA Patriot Act and shown how they've morphed NSPM 7 from that, shown how butthurt they get when you disagree with them about anything, and see that as a threat of violence. This show could be a threat of violence. No matter that we never call for violence, we always tell people to peacefully protest and peacefully resist. But it doesn't matter to them. Disagreement of any kind with their worldview is a threat of violence. So that is the most problematic line. And it's no coincidence that it's like the next to the last thing. Because by the time you get down to that one, and civil disorder is number 7. So we kind of tend to forget things that are buried toward the end of something. And so it's, again, they are very sophisticated. Regardless, people look at these people talking, and in the green room, we were talking about Doug Wilson, Pete Hegseth's spiritual daddy. And, he set up a church in DC that a lot of members of the regime go to, but he gave an interview this week to a Muslim female journalist, and she pushed him on, do you really mean that I can't vote or hold office? And he said, we intend to have a Christian constitution. And he means a white Christian nationalist as defined by Doug Wilson.
Right.
Christian constitution, where, of course, you wouldn't be able to vote Muslim female woman, but a lot of men wouldn't be able to vote either, because only Christian men will be able to vote. And how many times have we said that on this show? How many times have I said that was the goal? And here's Doug Wilson saying it now. And so many Americans process that as silly and arrogant, and what a ridiculous little man, and that'll never happen. And I want you to understand that you are being manipulated, or your colleagues, your connections, your families are being manipulated by this delivery system that they have used and designed to say the crazy thing and then neuter the crazy thing, so that a bunch of you can say, I don't have to worry about that. They're silly. They're arrogant. That won't happen. And then they say the crazy thing again. They tell people to hide it, and they just keep doing things like repurposing 10 different agencies in the federal government to be an NSPM 7 force that is identifying what they define as domestic terrorists. They're going ahead and doing it all, while we're sitting here going, oh, that'll never happen. And they're just arrogant, silly, weak little men.
So I made one last beautiful little slide. It also occurs to me that under their own definition of terrorism, they are terrorists, right? They are threatening violence on pastors who are operating their church as they see fit. They are threatening to take away our rights for flying a pride flag. The one, I didn't. We're kind of getting towards the end here. I wanted to we're going to talk about what to do about all this in a sec, but just briefly, the Sabbath law stuff is another sneaky thing that I kind of just wanted to touch on. Can you explain? Because it feels like, first of all, I'll have you explain what a Sabbath law would be, but it also seems like one of those things like, oh man, the government's going to give us a day off. Wonderful. Sounds great.
Well, you and I did a whole show on this back in February because I wrote about it, because this comes from the Heritage Foundation's Saving America by Saving the Family, which is their Project 2026. We talked about it on this show. But to show you how coordinated and in lockstep their messaging is, you have people in the theobromanosphere using the same ideas, and people in the pink pill female influence sphere using these same ideas. They're all in lockstep. 20 minutes talking to Mitch McConnell is not the only thing they can coordinate. They coordinate all of it. And so, Saving America by Saving the Family defined Sabbath laws, and most of us know a Sabbath law as a blue law.
Sure.
And a lot of municipalities and areas in the United States still have blue laws where you can't buy liquor on Sunday, or some places you can't buy alcohol at all on Sunday. Some places can't be open on Sunday. It's, that's how people know blue laws. But Saving America by Saving the Family called this community rest laws. It was very Orwellian, instead of calling it Sabbath laws like Joel Webbon did, they call them community rest laws, because of course having a day where you didn't have to do anything would be really great. But
so great.
If you didn't read further and see that they meant that freed up time and businesses couldn't be open so that everybody could go to church. And we talked in that show about how
to go to church.
But that's what that's built to do, is to persuade or perhaps coerce everyone to go to church on the Sabbath day instead of doing anything else. That was another thing. People have so many other things that they could do. So if we just remove all these other opportunities, then more people will choose to go to church, and then we can start coercing the ones who don't make that choice. Yeah. We talked about how Pete Hegseth's things at the Pentagon are also that. We've done a whole show on that as well. That's also how they operate. So, and I've talked about how Sunday was the most exhausting day of my life in white Christian nationalism. I was at church all day long with a little blip out to go have lunch somewhere and be a white Christian nationalist witness in our community, and then go home and take a nap. And then I was right back up at church for the rest of the day, So they don't mean this to be community rest laws. They mean it to be you're forced to go to church laws. And so when Joel Webbon says Sabbath laws, what he's saying, and he's saying it very plainly in this video, is we're going to take out all the churches that don't agree with us, so that the only options for people to be forced to go to church on these Sabbath law days are our churches, where, you're going to be check marked whether or not you're there, and followed up on and punished if you don't come enough times. You're going to have your wages garnished at least 10%. It's going to be compulsory. You're not going to be able to decide whether or not you're going to give to the church, and all these other things. This sounds insane. It sounds like they could never accomplish that, but that is what he is saying he wants to do. And there are a lot of people like him. Doug Wilson is like him. Doug Wilson controls the Pentagon. He's the daddy of the person who controls the Pentagon. Doug Wilson perhaps feels arrogant enough to say we need a Christian constitution where only Christian men can vote now, because he controls the military. And that should really scare everybody, but also understand this is not something that people have the luxury of sitting around anymore and saying this is a bunch of just silly, arrogant people and they're never going to be able to do that. They're doing it.
There's a thing called Boys State, and in where I grew up, all of us went to Boys State. It was a summer thing after like your junior year of high school, and it was essentially a mock government. I think there's actually a documentary about it now. But I didn't know at the time, it was just a thing that everyone did, that it was pretty Christian. Like, it was a pretty Christian thing. And in the mornings we would march, onward Christian soldier, right, from the dorms to this parking lot where they had a stage set up, and they did a benediction. And when they did that, you know, most of the 200, 300 odd Kansas boys bowed their heads. And a friend of mine was like, this is bullshit. I'm not going to bow my head to this. All of us were atheists at the time. And this Western Kansas hayseed boy elbows him and he says, bow your fucking head like this. And that is this little twist of coercion, right? It's not so subtle. And of course, my friend like looks around and it's a sea of these, you know, buzz cut boys with their heads bowed. So he bowed his head. He was like, well, what? I don't want to get beaten over this, right? That is what's happening now at the federal level.
Right.
That is where we are. And the Doug Wilson and Pete Hegseth and all of these people and Joel Webbon are racing to build this strategy to empower all of the people who will nudge you as the benediction happens and tell you to bow your fucking head. They are empowering that to happen. And they're racing because they know what we know, and that is they don't like to hear voices like ours. So let's talk about how to solve this problem. What do we need to do?
We have been indoctrinated as a society too, that we're not supposed to talk about politics and religion, that it's rigged. And because we followed those rules for, 5 decades or more, we don't know how to talk about those things anymore. And it's imperative that we practice, that we think about, how do I want to broach this with the people around me?
Yeah.
And start talking about it. And it might just be showing somebody that you're connected to the video of Joel Webbon saying we need blasphemy laws, or the video of Doug Wilson saying Christian Constitution, only Christian men vote, and saying, what do you think about that? And asking a person to talk about it. And then rather than telling them what it means, saying, do you think it's problematic that Doug Wilson is the most influential person other than our president in the life of the person who's in charge of the military? Do you think that's a problem? Why or why not? Instead of, I'm the one who's like, oh my God, this is a 4-alarm fire. We have, but when we're talking to each other, perhaps just showing people some of these things and saying, what do you think about this? This kind of bothers me. What do you think about it? Might be a better way to jumpstart some of those conversations and have them be a little less icky and confrontational. So that's one thing we could be doing a lot more of. Another thing that I think we all have to start doing for the midterms is finding out everything we possibly can about every candidate we think we want to vote for. And we've seen this week, what dastardly consequences can happen when we don't do that. So on one front, but on the Christian front or the faith front, it's also really important to do a whole deep dive into how a candidate spends their time on that front, so that we can decide whether we think they're hiding their light or not. That's essentially what Joel Webbon was telling them to do in White Christian Nationalist Evangelicalese, is hide your light. So
right.
That's what, we have the tools. Everything is online now and everything's public. There's so much surveillance. These people can't hide their light.
No.
We just have to work a little harder to be the flashlights that find where they're trying to hide it.
And I think it's also important, we say this a lot, that you need to find the next public meeting in your town, the school board, the city council, library board, whatever it is, put it on your calendar and show up. You don't have to talk, you don't have to speak, but you do have to be counted, right? And Andrew, you always say this, that the whole game is that bullies back down when they meet a stronger, louder, more organized foe. That, friends, is us. So be that foe, right? Stopping all of this starts locally where you are. Go subscribe to For Such a Time as This. All of this information is there. I will post this conversation as always soon. You can share this show with your pals, with the people who you think need to see it. I'll also post the slides that we made in the in that post as well. Andra, thank you as always. So enlightening, man. We got to do something.
We're doing it. We're doing it every week. And a lot of people here are doing it every week. And I appreciate all of you.
I love this community. I really do. I really feel like we're building something here.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you all. See you next time.
Bye.